Eu resolvi colocar aqui um timer de 25 minutos, começar a disparar o alarme na hora de ir fechando. E eu queria fazer uma pergunta, sim, rapidamente. Quem aqui é de primeira fase? Terceira fase? Quinta fase? Sétima fase? Sei lá que fase? Tem uns quantos aqui, né? Então, eu vou tentar conduzir essa conversa em inglês e vou fazer algumas introspecções em português, em função de maior clareza ou da minha falta de clareza do que eu estou falando. Então, what I'm going to talk today has to do with teaching practice, or whatever we do in teacher education, as a locus for the interaction between profession and education. I'm going to connect teacher education and the teaching profession. That's what I'm trying to do in here. And first of all, I'm going to resort to a bed point, by the way, of a beautiful place. Do you recognize this place? Yeah. Somewhere from Joaquina, looking south. I don't know what this is called, but acho que é o Parque Municipal das Dunas. Tem nome assim comprido. Né? Mas eu vou emprestar aqui uma metáfora da área ecológica. Essa pessoa aqui é uma pessoa, a Godoy, uma pessoa from Israel. By the time she was discovered, she was 84, 85 years old or something like this. And I remind me of Professor Celani, who was, she was brilliant, but the older she would get, the wiser. Okay. I'm trying to improve. The mic is here. Can you hear me? Okay. But the idea of the ecological edges metaphor is borrowed from biology. She is originally from chemistry, but the metaphor is taken from the field of biology. E essas zonas de transição ecológica, que é o termo que se usa em português, são essas áreas de borda em certos ecossistemas que tornam necessário para qualquer ente vivo naquele espaço, plantas, animais, pessoas, desenvolverem a habilidade de conviver em ambos ecossistemas. E em biologia se trata esse espaço como um lugar onde se aumenta a resiliência diante dos desafios que se tem. Ou seja, um inseto que vive nessa zona de transição ecológica, essas bordas, ele precisa desenvolver as habilidades para sobreviver nesse ambiente protegido, mas também no ambiente desprotegido que está ao outro lado. Ou de conviver com as demandas que o mar traz e que a terra tem também. Então, essa ideia, this idea is borrowed from the field of biology to account for environments of growth and potential change. You can grow there and there's change taking place in those places. But exactly because of that, they are also fragile and highly demanding environments. And that's what I'm going to talk about today regarding what we call estágio, right? But before I go on to estágio, I should discuss universities and schools, two different realms. But if you look at the goals and rules in for both universities and schools, you would realize that some of them look like something very similar. For example, universities are supposed to educate people all over the world, produce knowledge and science. We have this task. We are researchers, we have to do research and we have to produce knowledge. Some of us are engaged, or some of the universities are engaged in promoting social justice. This is in the field of applied linguistics, for example. It's everyone. It's common sense that we have to work to promote social justice. We should foster development, human development, language development, whatever development we can talk about, even economic development. And I would add a task, which is to prepare teachers. Universities, in general, prepare teachers, professors, researchers, and this kind of thing. If we look on the side of the schools, we would also have the task of educating people. We have to do that, we have to account for that. Produce applied knowledge, basic knowledge, but also applied knowledge. What do we do with whatever we learn? The idea of promoting social justice in an environment that is usually highly demanded. There are many more people in schools than universities. That means the task of schools have to do with dealing with social injustice from the very beginning. And to foster development, personal development, human development, and so on, and to prepare both students and teachers. Why am I adding teachers here? Because I would say that by educating people, we prepare students for their life. But I would say that we don't prepare for the future. We prepare people by living. And there's a distinction in some native communities that they say that learning and living is just the same. So you don't learn if you don't live. And by preparing students and teachers, I mean that, first of all, the school has to do with the task of dealing with students, but the schools that are involved with universities in teacher education programs tend to be involved also with preparing teachers for the job of teaching, right? That tends to be true. But I'd say that whenever we make this movement of putting universities and schools all together, there's this zone which we would call the student teaching zone, a zona de estágio. That's where I work, that's where Priscilla works, that's where we've been trying to work. And this term, I mean, sometimes we have the term internship, but the literature in education tends to favor the idea of student teaching. And I'd like to add that although this zone here is in the periphery of both environments, whatever happens here has the potential to change or to potentially affect the core of both environments. And that has absolutely everything to do with what Raquel was saying. When she said that by working with PVG and students in schools, she has a very clear notion that about what the university can do for schools or with schools, and I think you use that preposition, with schools, working with schools. We also have a lot to learn from schools. And that's the idea of partnership that I'm going to argue for today. Well, but to make it clear, we have, I think we should give you a very brief overview of our theoretical background when we deal with studies. There are at least four main sources here that has to do with my doctoral research work. It has to do with teaching as a highly complex professional endeavor. And that's from Tadjik, who unfortunately died 10 days ago or something like that. Canadian researcher working in Europe. But the idea that it's very complex because it needs to work on the contributions of different sources, like psychology, sociology, and well, whatever sciences you need to understand the school environment or teaching environments. Also, teaching practice as an essential component of learning how to teach. And that's from Zeigner, who was a very well-known author in the field of education, but he's also, he used to be very frequently cited in works in applied linguistics. Also, this idea of student teaching, this idea of estágio, as a third or hybrid space. She calls it a third space. Many people use the term hybrid, but I was corrected by a doctor who said hybrids tend not to reproduce, and good ideas should reproduce. So I've been avoiding the use of hybrid. They said hybrid tend not to reproduce. But a third space between two cultures. So whenever we deal with estágio, it is something, it's an initiative or something that the university has to do, but not at the university. It's the involvement of schools, but this space is not exactly like every other space in school. So it is not a third space. Third space. It's something that is in between. And the idea of the goal of student teaching courses or styles, two main goals: to foster interaction between culturally distinct spaces so that we deal with them respectfully, and to support the insertion of novice teachers into the teaching profession. In other ways, it's in the field of sociology, the idea of the sociology of professions. It's your first steps in a new profession. But you don't learn from scratch. There's something you bring in, but something you have to work with when you enter that profession. So you're not, it's not something that you don't have an idea of how it works. Even from experience, because before we go on to be estagiários, we have at least 11 years of instruction in elementary school, and then 4 or 5 or 7 or 11 years at university. It depends on how you conduct your academic life. But what makes good teaching? And I'm going to quote unquote good teaching. And I have this framework that somehow represents an idea of what good teaching means from a professional point of view. And it has to do with the idea of teaching as a profession, but also teaching a profession, which happens in places where learning happens in democratic society. So what we're not talking about teaching and learning regardless from the social context. So that comprises the knowledge of social context, of course, and I think we share the same ideas with many of the researchers here, regardless of whether you're working with literature or applied linguistics or whatever. Social context is the same. The knowledge of the learner, of how learners learn, what Mayusi was talking about a few minutes ago. Knowledge of human development. I think here we have something to be improved. This is something in the field of psychology and other fields that foster better preparation to teach. Knowledge of the subject matter. So if you teach English, you should know English. You should study English. So the fact that you don't have that subject matter in the curriculum doesn't mean you are dismissed from learning about it. You have to study. The fact that you don't have a course called Grammar Number 4, you should study grammar. As teachers, you should understand the subject matter. The idea of curriculum goals and purposes, why do we teach, how do we organize curricula, and so on. Applied knowledge about how to teach subject matter. It's not only an issue of knowing English, but knowing how to teach English. Two different things. An English speaker is not necessarily someone who is able to teach English. And applied knowledge about teaching diverse learners. And some of the students were here. Victor is here. He has just submitted a paper regarding his stage, and he's talking essentially about dealing with diverse learners. A brand new experience, I imagine, but well, very provocative. I think you will love one. I hope it is approved soon. and publish soon. And knowledge about assessment and, of course, classroom management. But in the first stage, we teach students, the first question is, how will I will use Portuguese? Porque vou dominar uma turma. Okay, this is not a sort of slavery and master, okay? You're not going to dominate anyone, you're not going to enslave anyone. You have to be able to manage situations that arise in the classroom. And situations that arise in front of 30 students sometimes, 20 students, a lot of students. So it's not like a doctor. I mean, a doctor has to manage people, but one at a time. Teachers have to manage 30, 20, 15, 40, 45. So that's something we have to learn. And, of course, I will refer to those domains of knowledge. And I would like to underline that you're dealing with teaching as a profession. It's a highly complex profession, highly complex job. And that we're talking about learning in democracy. We're not being authoritarian and we're dealing with classrooms. So, what is the secret? How can we make it happen? What could we make how could we make it happen? How could we foster professional development? So it's a number of questions we always have. And how could we connect education and profession? I was talking about connecting people to a new job, to a new profession. And we would start from some learning principles for facilitating teacher development. And the first one has to do with the idea that whenever we go to schools, we know a lot about schools. And some things we learn, we know from experience. And some things we know from the way we internalize our experience and we think about. And also regarding what we have learned before we start teaching there. And this, whatever we learn from our experience tends to influence the way we process the experience we have as teachers. And sometimes we tend to resort to the kind of reference which is more obvious. I mean, the ones I lived, but not necessarily like, but it's what I know. So sometimes when we talk about alternative assessment, for example, we all know it's important to assess students fairly and so on. How can we do that? What is my reference? And I have been saying that for my students who don't go directly to English 4 and go through the steps of English 1, English 2, they tend to experience a different perspective on the things they study later on. For example, the idea of communicative competence or a communicative classroom, they tend to have a different, I'd say, a sharp understanding of what the concept means. They tend to have more trouble with the language, but they tend to have a better understanding of what the concept means because they have experience, they have a reference. When you step directly into English 4, sometimes, I know English, I don't have to go through English 1, 2, and 3. But English 1, 2, and 3 tend to give you the tools to understand what your professors are saying 4 semesters away from them. Não quero com isso fazer nenhuma ideia de saudosismo, vale a pena, não pule etapas, é um direito que assiste, mas a ideia de experimentar o inglês 1, inglês 2, inglês 3, entender a lógica do processo, é um outro tipo de cuidado. O inglês 1 vai ter a percepção de que aquele estudante precisa ter um pouco mais de atenção e vai ser it's going to be the living experience of whatever you're going to study later on, okay? But, well, let's go on. The second principle I'm going to start here has to do to develop competence in an area that allows them to enact what they know. So the idea of putting in practice whatever you have learned before. And, of course, students, the prospective teachers, must have a deep foundation of factual and theoretical knowledge. So that does not mean that go and teach. That's not like this. You should understand what it means on theoretical grounds, whatever you're going to do in the classroom. You should understand that if you do something, there should be a reason for that decision you have just made, right? You should also understand facts and ideas in the context of a conceptual framework. So theoretical knowledge in a conceptual framework, and organize this knowledge in ways that facilitate retrieval and action. So in other words, propose something that makes sense for the students we're dealing with. Okay, and the third learning principle I'm going to bring here has to do with this metacognitive approach to instruction that can help teachers learn to take control of their own learning. So the idea that the best person to help you is yourself. You have to care about that. And it provides you tools for analysis of events and situations that enable to understand and handle the complexities in the classroom. So it's an interpretive filter that you use to understand what's taking place in the classroom. So no class is just like the other. So you have no students is just like the other. You have to understand the complexities of dealing with different people. And I'm going to give an example of I'm so sorry, you're here to pay for the bill. Mas no próprio estágio do Vitor, a ideia de ter numa mesma sala alunos autistas diferentes, com alunos que não estão no espectro autista, e você tem que se comunicar com todos eles e achar um jeito de cumprir os seus objetivos, dar conta disso, de uma forma que cognitivamente desafie todos os estudantes da mesma forma, que não responderão da mesma forma. Mas é essa ideia de aplicar o conhecimento, de parar para pensar, o que está acontecendo aqui? Eu acho que essa é a pergunta que move, por exemplo, o teu questionamento no paper, que brilhantemente está escrito. A ideia de resgatar da própria experiência os elementos para as novas experiências de aprendizagem da docência constituídas. Well, I'm talking. Concretely, what does that requires us to do? What do we have to do with all of that? Well, and I'll say that I'm not going to give any recipes, I can't, but I'm trying to talk about those requirements that we deal with students in our methodology and estágio classes. First one, that it requires that new teachers come to think about and understand teaching in ways quite different from what they have learned from their experience as students. That does not mean that you're going to discard whatever you have learned before. No, but you have to think critically about what you have learned so far. So it's like looking at the past to see the future. So it's not denying the past, it's learning from the past experiences so that you can pave the way to the future. Well, and the second requirement, which here has to do with understanding that teaching more effectively requires them not only to develop the ability to think like a teacher, but also to put what they know into action. So you have to think like and perform as a teacher. In the School of Medicine here, they have a course called Raciocínio Médico. I think it's more or less like this. Não sei se o título é esse, mas o nome da disciplina é Raciocínio Médico. Já falei para a Priscila, a gente está pensou várias vezes em montar uma disciplina que tem a ver com a ideia de raciocínio docente. Como é que pensa um professor diante de uma situação? A aula está pegando fogo. Como é que a gente pensa a respeito disso? E o raciocínio médico, eu trabalhei isso no curso de avaliação que eu lecionei do Prof, é a ideia de conectar todo o conhecimento básico que veio até a disciplina de semiótica na medicina com o conhecimento de contexto e dizer o seguinte, tá, agora decida. Uma coisa meio tipo house-like, só que sem a parte antiética. Né? Mas a ideia de performar como professor, pensar como professor e agir como professor. É a ideia se você é um adulto nessa relação. E é curioso, porque vocês ainda são os adultos um pouquinho mais novos, os estagiários são adultos um pouquinho mais novos do que um pouquinho mais velhos, desculpa, do que os próprios alunos. Nas turmas de terceiro ano, por exemplo, os estagiários são 4, 5, 6 anos mais velhos do que os próprios alunos. And I don't understand that you had any trouble with dealing with discipline, respect, and this kind of thing. You were dealing with that every time. And that has to do with thinking and acting as inseparable processes. You have to connect the two processes all the time. And the third of the learning part, requirements, and then requirements has to do with dealing with the problem of complexity. Teachers typically work with many students at once and have to juggle multiple. Juggling is I mean, we tend to use this metaphor to apply with students. We have to deal with all the balls at the same time, all the oranges at the same time. To juggle multiple academic and social goals at the same time, requiring trade-offs from moment to moment and day to day. So in other words, we are jugglers to some extent. We have to learn how to deal with the different things and be connected to all the students. And that does not mean we are going to be effective in all the situations and for all the students, but I mean, that's the effort you have to do. And this has to do with a difficult job that paradoxically looks easy. I mean, there is this saying in Portuguese, quem sabe faz, quem não sabe ensina. Isso é cruel, né? Cruel, errado, equivocado. Because teaching is a really, really difficult job, complex job. Difficult is a word I try to avoid. Complex. I mean, we are complex thinkers. We are philosophers. We are sociologists. We are psychologists. We are linguists. We are literature experts. At the same time, we are all of this, of those things at the same time. And I will bring some 4 elements for reflecting on the complexity, since I was talking about how complex it is, on the complexity of teaching. So, first one is teaching is never routine. Even when we discuss or we're going to prepare for a course, we have talked before. So you have a 7th grade to teach this year, and you had another one last year and the year before, and so on. It's never the same. Maybe the content is the same. Maybe a few students are the same, but the situation is never the same. The context, the social context, for example, learning after pandemic, like we're dealing now, gathering together, this is something, it's different. So it's never routine. It's also done in relationship with diverse groups of students. Diverse students and diverse groups of students. Don't say, well, there's this 7th grade. You can manage that as a group, but within that group there are different groups or different ways of grouping students. Students with, I don't like the word, special needs. Students that tend to be uneasy, or students that have difficulty with the subject matter, and it goes on and on. Teacher has multiple goals. I would say different layers of goals. So with the educational goals, we have to do with building ways of respectful citizenship in the classroom. Within the language level, you would have the idea of developing deep knowledge of how to use present tense to make statements of facts that are generally true. Well, it goes on different layers, but and you have also the teaching goals, but also the learning goals. Learners happen. They require some sort of interaction between who teaches and whoever learns. And teaching requires multiple kinds of knowledge to be brought together in an integrated way. And that's also that, we have to bring everything together. So all the courses you've been taking, you have to connect whatever you have learned then when you go to a classroom to be the teacher. Be the teacher in charge. So, What do learning communities is an idea that we have been working with, right? The idea of building learning communities, and what do those learning communities have to do with that complexity? I'm trying to connect the idea of constructing a community and dealing with complexity. And this picture taken from a book from 2005 has to do with the idea of connecting understandings, practices, tools, dispositions, and visions in very interactive ways. And the idea of making that complexity not seem simpler, but work in a way that is effective for the purposes of life. And that also has to do, well, the idea of community engagement is implied in the idea of building community. So if you're building a community, you have to create situations for the engagement. And we have a source we have been using a lot in our course, locus, but working with a critical pedagogy based on members Wei's teaching, I entered the classroom with the assumption that we must build community in all the spaces. So in order to create a climate of openness and intellectual work, that the idea of working in partnership with whoever you're dealing with. And to sum up, the idea that we can learn with and from others, like Raquel was saying, interprets herself, that the whole is more and way more than just the sum of the parts. So if you connect all the knowledge you have, you will have something much bigger than what you have at any given point. There's too much to be learned within any given time. So by sharing effort, we multiply outcomes. That's what explains why we create teams and we have teams working with teams and so on. And it's a deliberate effort. So we have to, it's purposeful. You have that in mind and you work with that in mind. So you have a purpose and you have to carry it that way. I guess that's it. Thank you.